No camera ever had as much hype as the Fuji X100V. There are thousands of videos about it. It's always sold out. Even used, you could pay up to $2,000 more than in store. And apparently everyone who has one loves it. So, no pressure, but the X100VI needs to be pretty good. The Fuji X100VI looks like an old analog film camera, but in reality it's packed with modern technology and the photos it can take are truly something special. The design looks as it is many decades old. Not necessarily minimalistic, but undoubtedly timeless. The entire housing is made out of robust metal, available in silver or black. There are lots of buttons and dials that all click very nicely. This camera looks like it can survive every adventure, and the impression is true. I had the predecessor everywhere with me, and it only has some tiny scratches that add more character. You can even screw in your own button as an accent. It is so beautiful and high quality that you always want to hold it in your hands, and so compact that you can always have it with you. It weighs just as much as two smartphones and it fits easily into jacket pockets, small backpacks, or you carry it around your neck like I do. Because it is so easy to have it with me all the times, I do have it with me, and that's why I've taken photos with it that I would have never taken with a large camera. It's perfect for traveling and it looks so good that it's always a nice accessory to your outfit. It doesn't scare anyone. It doesn't stand out in a negative way, and that is essential for street photography. The X100VI looks exactly like the predecessor. There are only 3 subtle differences. The model name at the top, of course, the Bluetooth symbol on the back bottom, and it's about 2 mm thicker, but that's nothing you would notice. However, it also means that 2 points of criticism I had about the predecessor have not been resolved. First, the joystick for moving the focus point. It's still tiny and feels a bit cheap. And second, there's no official waterproofing, but you can solve this with using an insulating adapter ring, as I'm using it all the time. There's a total of 4 displays. A large, beautiful, sharp one off the back that can now tilt 15% further than before. Unfortunately, however, it cannot tilt sideways, which makes it a little bit harder to make pictures in portrait mode. There is an OLED viewfinder, which is not only the largest one I know, but pleasantly sharp, and with the touch of a button, the OLED viewfinder moves down and you can look through the rangefinder. Some people like this unfiltered view of the reality. The 4th display is the smallest one I know of. It's a tiny window in the corner of the rangefinder and you can see the exposure or focus, for example. The reason why this camera can be so small is the reason why it is so special, and that is the fact that the lens is fixed. It cannot be changed. It has a focal length of 23 mm with an f2 aperture, which is about 45 mm on full frame. It's a popular focal length among photographers and my favorite. It's narrower than the field of view of a smartphone, so you can isolate an object or a subject, but it's also wide enough to have the surrounding, the context in the picture as well. Because there is hardly any bokeh, the content and the light become more important. With an 85mm f1.4, everything looks good somehow, but not with this lens. It takes practice to take spectacular photos. You have to move around and look for an interesting angle, leaving your comfort zone, having to get creative. That's the strength of a fixed lens, and that's why it's so much fun. It's not a technically perfect lens, it's not the sharpest, it has weird flares and hardly any bokeh, but it has character, almost a bit vintage. Sometimes I enhance this effect with a mist filter. Such a special lens is great for street photography, but it's not ideal for other things. I found product photography so-so, and taking portraits is also a bit tricky. You have to keep a certain distance. And the biggest flaw in my eyes is the manual focus. It's slow and cumbersome. I only used it in emergency and otherwise relied on the autofocus, which was right 99% of the time, either on a specific point or with eye detection. The sensor of the X100VI is a new one with 40 megapixel and a new processor and IBIS. In addition to the higher resolution, it's now able to shoot at a minimum of ISO 125 and a maximum of 180 thousandths of a second shutter speed. In direct comparison, the photos are now definitely sharper, which of course looks good and above all things gives more flexibility in post. I can now zoom in twice in an image and still have 10 megapixel. That's worth a lot, especially because this is a fixed lens. What the sensor lacks somehow is dynamic range. Sometimes the photos have a little bit too much contrast for my taste. I like the color reproduction of Fuji. It is something natural and soft. I also would describe the sharpness as soft. 40 megapixel is a lot, but I never had that moment where I was like, oh wow, I can count every single fine hair, like with an Hasselblad or a Leica camera. The X106 uses the 5th generation of Fuji processor, the same one used in the GFX 102, so it's like a 10,000 euro camera. And it brings autofocus improvements. Thanks to artificial intelligence, people, animals and subjects are better understood and kept in focus. This works very well and much better than before. It is still not the fastest autofocus I know, but that's due to the lens. The biggest improvement is the stabilized sensor. With the predecessor, it was hard to shoot in your hand with a shutter speed of 125. But now you can easily go down to a second. So your pictures can be much brighter and less noisy, or you can have a long shutter speed because it just looks cool. And the video modus is way better because of it. You can take shots out of your hand in 4K at 60 FPS or 6.2K at a maximum of 30 FPS. It's a great quality for smaller video projects. The autofocus is nice and smooth. The field of view is a little bit too narrow for vlogging though. Great for photos and videos. There is an internal 4-stop ND filter, a feature that every camera should have. With this and the built-in flash, you can have a great look in portraits. It generally invites you to experiment and you are prepared for every situation. You can use the flash without much technical knowledge because this camera has a leaf shutter. Fujifilm has been making cameras since 1934. They have their origins in analog film, and they have always been known for their beautiful colors. With the switch to digital sensors, a lot of these colors were lost. Nowadays, smartphones and cameras tend to be cool and accurate. But Fuji had a brilliant idea. They converted their old film stock into digital profiles. That's not just a cheap filter they slapped on there. It's much more than that. And the result of this is that you have great colors and moods without any editing. These pictures are directly out of camera. I edited this whole video in a special way so it looks like it was shot on film. In my case, I was using a software called Dehancer Pro, which is $400. But the Fuji can do it in camera. Of course, the X106 also can shoot RAW and neutral, but I only shot in JPEG with film simulations. There's a new film profile, it's called Reala Ace. It's expressive yet natural and it works in almost every situation. You can create up to 7 different profiles and it's easy to switch between them. There's now a total of 20 film emulation and each one can be heavily modified, which is why there are hundreds of so-called recipes online that can emulate the look of very different film reels. From dark to pastel to warm and rich, everything is possible. This turns the Fuji X106, a modern digital camera that looks like an analog camera, into something that can take photos that look like an analog film camera. I love that I can see the finished picture while taking it and I don't have to spend ages in post-processing. In a way, the film emulation are a bit of cheating. You can make a lot of things look cooler than in real life, but you can't save any situation. You have to develop an eye for the right moment. There is a smartphone app for the Fuji cameras and it works pretty reliable for me. You can stream the live feed or you can make software updates and copy your pictures directly onto your smartphone and share them in social media. I enjoyed doing the latter and the feedback was always overwhelming. Everywhere we look, there are only smartphone pictures and they all look the same. But these pictures, they stand out. The X106 has USB-C, so you can use it as a webcam and charge the battery. It lasts pretty long, easily for one day. It's about 450 pictures. I only charge it quite rarely. The X106 is special. All of the improvements are welcome and they enhance the picture quality without sacrificing the character. But the price did increase because of it. It's now $1,599 which is pretty expensive, but cheaper than the predecessor used. So that's good news, and I think you will get one because Fuji is now building this camera in China and not Japan anymore, so there is more availability in the future. I think this camera is not for you if you are one of two persons. First, an absolute amateur, one that is shooting with its smartphone right now. I think you will be a little bit confused with this camera. And second, an absolute pro who wants to work with this camera. It is a little bit slow and you can't change the lens, but this camera is perfect for you if you love photography, you want a small camera with you every single day, and you want a high picture quality and a lot of character to go with it. I think this camera made me a better photographer, and my journey is not at the end yet.